Good morning. Today is Friday, November 27th, 2020. Yesterday, the U.S. Justice Department announced new regulations for allowing for more methods of federal execution, including the firing squad and electrocution. In the last number of decades, the only method of execution used by the federal government was lethal injection. So I'd like to first focus on looking at this from the point of view of Jewish law. Clearly, the Torah legislates capital punishment for certain crimes, and just as clearly, that is irrelevant to the question of capital punishment today. Because Jewish law requires for capital punishment to be imposed, number one, that the Jewish people are living in Israel with the Beit HaMikdash standing and the Sanhedrin HaGadol, the great Sanhedrin, sitting in judgment. It requires standards of evidence and testimony that are rarely, if ever, reached. Two direct, unchallenged eyewitnesses, a warning must be given first, and many other criteria that make the imposition of capital punishment virtually impossible. So none of those standards are in place today, and therefore the question today relates to a different area of Jewish law, and that is Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, the 7 Noahide laws. Among the laws that the Torah has, not just for Jews, but for the entire world, for all of humanity, one of them is a mitzvah called dinim. Dinim means that, from our point of view, every non-Jewish society has the obligation to have a judicial system, a system of justice. Now, what that system is, how it works, what the details are, that is subject to the decision of each government, of each society, as long as it is some type of judicial system that is a fair system of justice. And that means that a society can decide which punishments should be imposed for which crimes. However, halakhic authorities disagree if that includes the power to execute, to impose capital punishment. Some say yes. If you give societies and governments the obligation to set up a judicial system, and you tell them it's within your power to decide how it should be run, so it's in their power to decide how it should be run. If a government decides to do it this way, they should be allowed to do it that way, even if that includes capital punishment. Other halakhic authorities disagree, and they say that preserving life takes precedence. The only exception to preserving life is when the Torah itself mandates capital punishment with all of the standards in place. That becomes a specific commandment that supersedes the normal preserving of life, but outside of that narrow window of specific legislation, when all the standards for capital punishment are in place, the general mitzvah of dinim that applies to the entire world for setting up a judicial system does not allow overcoming the generally cardinal principle of protecting life. That dispute is unresolved among halakhic authorities, and my opinion, along with those of many others, is that as long as it is unresolved, we must object to capital punishment in a secular society today, as it is at the very least Safek sakonas nefashos, the possibility of a threat to life, the possibility of taking a life which is not allowed. And as we know from many previous discussions, even the possibility of taking a life that is not permitted, that is something that we're not allowed to do. So as long as there is an open dispute about this issue, we must be stringent and not allow the taking of life under these circumstances. That's my opinion. There may be others who disagree, but that's my opinion. There is a middle opinion. And the middle opinion says, a society has the right to impose capital punishment under this general rubric of dinim, of setting up a judicial system, but only if the evidence and the testimony would qualify in a Sanhedrin according to Jewish law, which means practically capital punishment would almost never be imposed. Because if you take a look at, in those places where capital punishment is imposed, what are the types of evidence that are used, in almost no cases would it rise to the level where a Sanhedrin would have imposed capital punishment under those circumstances. Another approach that's based on a passage in the Talmud, the Gemara Masechta Sanhedrin, would only allow capital punishment when it can be shown to be a deterrent against further crime. And I think that that would disqualify capital punishment today. Now, independent of that is a separate question. If a society does impose capital punishment, like the United States today, are there any lessons from Jewish law in how it should be done? And so the answer to that is yes. Number one, what we learn from Jewish law very, very clearly is even if capital punishment is going to be allowed, it should be extremely rare. The Talmud says during the time when capital punishment was authorized back long ago in Jewish history, that if it happened even once in 70 years, that was too much. So it must be extremely rare. And number two, the Talmud says when capital punishment was actually imposed by Sanhedrin, according to Jewish law, an intoxicant was given to the person first. In other words, the person who was being executed felt no physical pain when that took place. And therefore, it would be a lesson from Jewish law that any method of execution should include this. And it's fascinating that the Talmud explains why this happened. It's a startling statement. And remember, we're talking about a person who has been convicted of a capital crime. There is no question about their guilt. And the Talmud says, even about such a person, Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, you shall love your fellow as you love yourself, says the Talmud, barin lo misa yafeh. You should choose for this person a good death. Of course, that's an oxymoron. Of course, we are executing this person. There is no minimizing that. But at the very least, do it in a way that if, God forbid, it was being done to you, that's how you would want it. Not to feel pain. To have an intoxicant given, a sedative given first. The Talmud adds that in addition to assuring no physical pain, it was also a requirement to try to minimize violence and disfigurement to the body during that execution. So it's clear to me that Jewish law opposes capital punishment as it is conducted now in the United States. And if it is done, it certainly should not be done by firing squad. When I give Divrei Torah, I try to stay away from politics. But this is literally a question of life and death, so I will add this. Experts are saying that this new regulation is intended to facilitate more executions taking place before the current administration leaves office, which is a horrible and immoral step to take. Already, more U.S. federal executions have taken place in the last 6 months than at any comparable period since 1927. That is a legacy no one should be proud to claim. And President-elect Biden has indicated he wants to halt all federal executions. Baruch Hashem. Thank God. And I hope he is successful in doing that. My friends, I want to wish you a great day and a fantastic Shabbos. And I look forward to seeing all of you soon in person.